like it a little bit more contract for a bit more courage.
afternoon.
Oh, I was just texting you there.
That's all right.
I'm stuck in a Starbucks. How bad is the background noise?
Yeah, it's sort of you could hear, sort of disjointed. It isn't.
Is it slightly better now?
You can't hear people speaking. It's probably just a bit choppy in the background. When I logged in, there was a horn box that's now disappeared. So when the box drops off, it'll come back in again. I don't know.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just wondering on a quick issue. Author basic. Maybe I should change it to author core or something less basic. Just the name.
Well, here they come.
Hi, Jim. Hi, Peter. Sorry, I'm stuck in a Starbucks today, and I don't want to scream to annoy people too much, so I'm going to mute myself and try to listen as much as I possibly can to you guys.
Sure.
We're split straight down the middle there between those who were physically there and those who were virtually there at the symposium this week.
Good morning,
Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I'm still suffering from virtual jet lag. So I'm doing a late brunch in with Mom. So I don't have a picture today other than my nice shiny photo.
It's funny, Peter, in that picture, you look twice as old as you are in real life. When I saw you finally for real on video, it was like, whoa, who's this young man?
Thanks so much, Rod.
It was quite cute. Emily was sitting on the other side of the hall from me during the symposium when she was there. And she texted me, Peter's sleeping, when you were napping.
Yeah. I'm just resting my eyes.
Edgar calls it blinking.
Well, the 4 a.m. wake up is brutal.
So, that's so
Try
weird.
1 a.m.
Really? Yeah, that's when we usually go to bed, right, people?
Yep.
So it's been interesting in the aftermath. So I managed to save the 2 keynotes. They are recorded and online, linked to from the symposium website. But the other ones, a lot is missing because the speaker in the room that was next to the camera that I hoped would augment the sound was really shit. And they didn't have a line out, which I guess is not just their fault, it's my fault too. But anyway, it was the recording was a fiasco on the top of the internet connection. Everything had to be done off my iPhone. There was no functioning Wi-Fi.
It's an interesting reflection on the sort of asymmetry of networks. So Freud, during the meeting, handed me a SD card, said, look, can you empty this for me? And I took 128 gigs, I think it was, of camera data, put it on my hard drive. And I'm on a sort of, well, here I'm on a 50 down, 10 up system, and Dropbox still has 4 hours to go to put that into the cloud. So
Really?
pick it up. Yeah. I've been running it. I mean, actually, I've got what I learned. What I needed to do is to put amphetamine or a similar thing on to make sure the Mac didn't fully go to sleep overnight, which it normally would. At which point Dropbox stops. And to do this, for instance, I paused Dropbox because otherwise its upload kills all the back and forth transmission that's normally going on. So if you're fully maxing out your uplink, what actually happens is all the other communications going on get really, really slow. And I'm sure my video would be absolutely rubbish if I were to turn the Dropbox on. I mean, in fairness, it's trying to upload, I don't know, 15 gigs still. So it's, if it was just tiny stuff in the background, you wouldn't even notice it.
Yeah, it is quite a lot. But I haven't heard much back from people about the email I sent out yesterday saying, let's really focus on the written contribution. So let's see how that goes. I have written contributions from the 3 of you, I believe. Actually, I don't have your final, do I, Mark? Anyway, not urgent.
Ah,
I wonder if Randall is joining us. There he is.
so I'm guessing still in UK by the look of it. Rocking that hotel vibe.
So, Randall, it turns out I have to go to Norway tomorrow morning. So we don't have a lot of time for the second half of Hamilton, I'm afraid.
I've sent Brandel, and this is not something that requires urgent action, but just so you know, somewhere in your mailbox will be, I said I'd send you the literary machines as a text file and some notes raised on the stuff we discussed about books and book lists. It should be self-evident, but don't be surprised when that turns up.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just trying to get my earphones working so that I can operate without disturbing Heather.
Right. Ah, here's Bob.
Fabian said he would be a bit late today, about half an hour. Hi, Bob.
Oh, gone again. Well, here, but not on camera.
He's eating breakfast, so pausing video.
That I entirely understood. I mean, it's always difficult to find a time that's convenient to people.
Another question is, where do we go from here?
Well, one immediate thing, of course, will be to pull together the. I mean, one interesting thing that comes out of this is, assuming the bios you've asked for come through. One interesting bit of dog fooding we can do is that the volume 3, effectively the future of text, will actually have a much more interesting data set that we can play with. And I still think it's sort of on somewhere on my to-do list is to try and get in touch with David LeBeau and see if I can get some of his keywords that he made inside his system out, so we can use those just as general data. Basically we can make another JSON asset we can use to enhance the data set, because I mean, in a sense, what we've got is a good precursor to say, well, if you want to say use a VR environment for an enhanced understanding of the output of a conference, here is some. And there'll be holes and things, but to me, again, this is it's in essence, it's just another prototyping exercise. We can say, well, these are the bits that are completely missing. These are the bits that proved to be subpar, but now we can see what we needed that we didn't ask for, and this sort of thing. So that alone will be, a bit of ongoing work to do.
You have a woodpecker hammering at the side of the house.
It just heard that too.
Yeah, no, the bias will be one thing, but I wonder if people will like the idea of writing an article that's maximum 2 pages, but they can write more than one if they want to. I really hope that that can be done, because one thing, we used to have 5-minute presentation, 10-minute dialogue, move on. And that really worked. And like the one of us who's been here in person arguing over this, there was way too much introduction of the market situation, how I came to this point, all that stuff. Doesn't help them, doesn't help anybody. So same with reading, as Bob has pointed out. Even bolding a few sections in the transcript makes things readable. A lot of it is fluff, and editing is hard. Including editing your own stuff. So yeah, there is that. By the way, Brenda, when I said we don't have much time, I don't know what you guys are doing later tonight. You can always come for drinks and a movie.
Thank you. I'll Heather didn't catch it, so I will tell her. Friday is to go to Norway tomorrow. So, is everything okay?
My mom fell off the mountain.
Oh dear.
Yeah, it's quite a big oh dear. It's been all day trying to find out what happened, but it's insane. She's 87 years old, fell down at least one story, maybe two stories of mountainside by home. Was found
Oh
in
my
the middle
God.
of the night by a neighbor when she was trying to crawl herself back. And the
Wow.
hospital in Norway is, I mean, the NHS here in the UK is the best in the world. Maybe Singapore is equally good, but in Norway, they wanted to send her home on the first day. You know, it's just, hang on, she's 87 years old, fell down a mountain. You don't know what's going on inside her body, so yeah. So hence, something I'm playing tomorrow morning. Just to hold these
Yes, absolutely
doctors
understandable.
by their throats. But she is actually completely sound mind. It's really weird talking to her. She sounds completely normal. She's the kind of force of nature that will be super strong until she snaps. So thank God she didn't
Yes,
snap last night. But thank you for asking,
yes.
Ted.
I'm
Such
glad
is,
you're able to get to her.
yeah, thank you. It's a very easy flight home to do, which hopefully all of you will get to appreciate next year if we hold this in
Yes,
Norway.
yes, indeed. Yeah. Um.
Anyway, yes, so moving forward. Since there's been not a lot of replies to that email, if you guys can each reply to the one, kind of the thank you after action report, just saying, oh yes, I will be delivering my complete bio with one or two articles very soon. This is all such a good thing. You know, get this.
Okay. I'm happy to. I mean, I didn't present anything, but I'm happy to provide a bio.
Or you can even say, this is such a brilliant thing. If I was going to present something, you know.
I
I
like that
mean,
angle.
Jim is done. He's delivered a perfect piece. You know, it's formatted in the way we've asked, and Jim and Bob, both of you have really inspired the whole thing of why we're making this change, like you guys. So you don't need to do squat. Either yours is big, so you can either keep it or you can split it up, whatever you feel like. And your smart will be quite focused and small, won't it?
Well, you should have a bio from me already, and if not, I'll send it through again. I owe you an article, which was the thing I sort of didn't present because I didn't really think it needed to take people's time. It's kind of read, which was about some quite edge casey stuff about, you know, how we detect stuff in image maps. But I'm thinking of your other point, just making small things. So, for instance, you know, Brandon saying, "Well, I didn't present." I mean, I think actually, even getting attendees to say, "Well, here are the things I took from it." You know, even if it's here are glaring holes, or here are things that are really good to see, or, you know, this is something that people may have looked. I think even that's remarkably useful, because, you know, the thing that I think I've taken from this year of doing this is just how much virgin territory there is here. Simply because it's just not where the money is, really. You know, it's something that at the moment probably everyone is assuming. I guess everyone assuming that, you know, Microsoft will suddenly fill the gap, and I feel, looking at things now, it feels very much how things were looking at, you know, Office and Creative Suite in the mid-90s when the web suddenly arrived, and oh dear, it didn't really have a solution for that. And there was a really interesting couple of years, well, more than a couple of years, while effectively the status quo had to run very fast to catch up with the new norm, and that's probably where we are in this case. Now, ironically, because the emphasis is probably more on things like entertainment, that I suspect that, you know, this is why we're not seeing, you're not seeing things saying, here's how to present your, you know, your corporate quarterly report in a pie chart in VR.
Yeah, it may be the case that people outside of the Microsofts and the Googles and the Apples have full confidence that the Microsofts and the Googles and the Apples are on top of it. But the reality is that, one, those companies are enormous. They're colossus sort of organizations of literally hundreds of thousands of people apiece. And two, the people who are working on the technology are, I thought, kind of established, like graphics people and real-time and interactive graphics people, film effects, like you say, Mark, entertainment. And unfortunately, it's not going to be an immediate situation where people recognize that the information people need to be able to think about what the 3D people who have previously been entertainment people are actually building. And you know, that's my concern is that if it's informed primarily by entertainment, then a lot of fairly silly defaults will prevail until such time as people realize how much waste there is essentially in that, both in terms of processors and systems, but also cognitively and aesthetically for the benefit of the actual information underpinning it all. So yeah, like appreciate the note of confidence, but it takes a good long while for people to connect the dots about what it is that these media are actually for.
Yeah. The ironic upside, though, is that with roles like yours, actually, maybe this turn we may get ahead of it, because I'm sure those of us who were around at the time will remember it wasn't much fun. No, better viewed in Internet Explorer 5.5. I really don't want to go there all over again. So to a certain extent, because I again, the big thing I've sort of taken away, so for instance, one thing I've really taken on board is that whereas I was thinking, what we actually need, driven by the fact that people want to do AI and ML, is that systems need to be able to provide clean text. But actually, I've realized that's not quite true. Probably what you want is you want a clean DOM, because the DOM can be stripped if it can easily be found and stripped if not when not needed, without much error. But also it allows you to get some introspection of the content. And that's the sort of step change I've sort of taken on board, in the sense that, so that's one thing I'd love to see deeply rooted in this before all the big players come out, obviously with completely contrasting ideas of how it should be done.
Yes.
By the way, did you see Tim Cook's comments yesterday or today? I can't remember. He's so excited about AR. It's all about the AR, which is of course a continuation of what they've been saying, but it was interesting nevertheless.
I saw some people at work joking that somebody from public relations had to cut his mic, but I'm not sure if that was accurate or just a joke in terms of what kind of eyebrow waggling he was doing about anything. Yes, it is interesting what people say about AR. I think AR is cool. It just needs to be done very well in order to be worth it. And I feel like in many regards, virtual reality can be slightly more forgiving.
So, certainly, the thing that I've been impressed by, I mean, the quality of pass-through now, that's one thing that really, I mean, it's better than passive night vision goggles that I used of old. So it's good enough, but it really brings home the point you just made, that just having some crappy wireframe put onto your reality isn't really what we're talking about. So yeah, it needs to be good. And indeed, if it's more VR than AR, even if what you're after is AR, that's probably good. For instance, you might be that rather doing a full pass-through, you might do some sort of a facsimile. In a sense, a created confection of what's there, but deliberately, so you've got it might be easier then to do the blend of the computed versus the quasi-real than just trying to say put stuff on top of pass-through. I see Peter has his hand up.
Yeah, I dropped a bunch of links in the chat. The first one is to scimaps.org, which has a bunch of visualizations of different areas of science. There's a section on scholarly visualizations, sections on several different subdisciplines. We'll just love playing with it. It'll give you ideas what we could do in the VR space. Second, I want to note that the MIT Press has a 50% off sale on select titles that's going to end today. There are a couple of VR-related titles I'll be picking up. Then I have a link to the companion website for one of the books from the MIT Press sale. And it was a book about VR that structured each one of its chapters as a VR experience. That says it's compatible with Oculus when it listed the hardware, so you should be able to go in and have a look in there. And the last link is to Arizona State University's Applied Sci-Fi program, which did a wonderful talk yesterday with Bruce Sterling. It's not uploaded yet, but it's going to be very shortly. And they were talking about all sorts of applications of speculative design and what kinds of things we might be able to pull through from science fiction in order to help shift the course of events in the real world. So I think you'll find that fascinating. The other day, I gave you the link to the architecture lecture series, and there was one talk this week that was talking about working wood constructions that had some amazing uses of AR in it. And they were having the blocks, and everyone was wearing a HoloLens in the warehouse, and you actually saw all the sketches of where the cuts were supposed to be superimposed over the blocks of wood before they went in and used the equipment to make the cuts. So that was a really fascinating talk. And I don't have the exact link to that one, but you can find it from the link the other day to the architecture set.
That sounds like the original use of the camera obscura. You get the projection and you paint over. In fact, it looks like that some of the early masterpieces, because you actually have the bokeh blooming highlights painted, which is interesting. So that's really an interesting parallel, Peter. Thank you.
Oh, also, I should note that the World's Fair Company, under Cameron Weiss, which is organized to try to set up a new World's Fair here somewhere in the States in the near future, well, a few years out, however long it takes them to actually pull the thing together. But in their list of what they're doing in their anticipated future steps, they want to make a major push into VR so that before they go and try to organize building the fair for real, they want to create a VR representation of the fair beforehand. So that's going to be something to follow.
I went to one of the things that I did when I've been here. I think yesterday we went to the British Museum, and it was very interesting thinking about the authorial intent, the sort of presentation decisions that are made in reference to the objects, whether it's better to represent things as they likely would have been, as they are now, or potentially even as they were used in situ. And there's necessarily going to have to be some interpretation and editorializing in order to be able to kind of place things in a context that's because of the context that's lost. But I really excited and eager for VR to be able to kind of allow people to play with those things, because you can't do all three, and you with sort of when you have to elevate a single tangible physical artifact as being the sort of the prime thing to be looking at. And yeah, there are all sorts of temptations when you have to do that to be able to set up an entire context for sort of presenting what an object is. And I think that one of the things I'm very excited about with VR and especially webby VR is the navigable, transitionable capacity to kind of comprehend an object in a space or an environment in a context, and then move on. Because you don't need to worry about paying the ticket price. People don't need to worry about how much it costs for individuals to be sort of play acting and pretending to be certain characters and things like that, because it scales and you can kind of put that stuff together and tear it down without having to worry about moving an entire cohort of school students through at a decent enough clip to be able to make your money back. So I'm really excited about the flexibility of the context and the informational content that can surround those things as a consequence of virtual reality. And I actually don't know that much about what the glam sector thinks about it. Does anybody connect? I mean, you spoke, Frodo, to the Linnaean, and that while they were interested, I understand that they were sort of understandably probably cautious given the likely sort of annual budget they would typically have for a big kind of punt, but presumably more well-funded organizations and ones that are sort of have maybe implicitly more future focus are doing things and are thinking things about that. What does anybody know about that?
Well, the thing that struck me yesterday, which I think speaks to this, is what Tim Curlin said. He doesn't use VR for anything other than those things that have to do with the physical world. Very much like the word example Peter just made. And having really done a lot of playing in my head, there seems to be two categories. I'm sure this is obvious. One, real world stuff, including being at the Linnaean, having that scanned and taking a card. So you can have real world stuff with magic. Like you have the card or the slip, but you can expand it. So it's basically real world. And then you have the traditional world, like writing in VR. I would probably only ever do to block the world out and use a small screen. It's foveal vision, basically, right? But editing seems to me to be one of those. Reading can be nice because you can also block the world out, like some of those PDF readers in VR are fantastic. But editing your own stuff and organizing large volumes of information seems to be the most promising category for us. I completely agree with what Peter said, that those visualizations of data is amazing in VR. But I think the investment for us to really do that, it would have to be some real data. I mean, Kalev, who was really annoyed at me for interrupting it to check on timing, he has access to some really great APIs, which we could use. But I think that's really big money to build something useful. But I don't know, in terms of what to focus our discussions on, not that we're going to actually build anything, but in terms of even building a prototype to feel it, what area do you guys feel we should go towards? And those categories I said are completely arbitrary. Maybe you have different ones. Over. I'm at Starbucks. You're going to have to.
Sorry, no, before I step on anything,
I
have a thought on that. I mean, you're right. I think the really big data sets that it plays back to this conversation we were having about people throwing around the word bias when really what they meant was incompleteness. And some of these things are too big for us to know. But an area of tractability is in the personal or small group knowledge space, I think, where there's lots of exploratory work to be done. And it's not well understood by people who don't have some regular access to or sort of who meet this. I mean, there's the thing I'm constantly aware is, most people, if I talk to them and I describe the sort of thing I'm doing, have really no concept of what it is, because it's not just typing up and sending people letters and spreadsheets, which is where most work is. And that's not to trivialize that work. It's different. But this more, I mean, what perhaps the key thing is with sort of knowledge work is that normally you don't know what the answer is. So the template-based approach that most people use to their work is not helpful. In fact, it's positively unhelpful in most cases, because you're normally putting the wrong framework over the wrong information and making your problem harder. And if you keep that very fluid and you have the wonderful potential affordance, of a big and open workspace where you can do what you need to, that I think is tremendously powerful. And I suspect from a proper, from a sort of a decent exploration in that workspace will come ideas which will then happily bleed off into more definable forms of work. Because I don't think actually anyone needs to be doing a spreadsheet in 3D at the moment. They might want to display it to somebody else, but I don't quite sort of see the need. I mean, whereas I can see a use that you might want to take a really large data table. That was my link in the sidebar about R Shiny, because R is like the SPSS language. It's the open source version of it, very large developer community, and it's sort of R and Python are the two languages of sort of doing data science. And R also has a quite active markdown thing for doing the equivalent of Jupyter notebooks. It's just, instead of using sort of JavaScript or Python, it's using R. And so, because part of me is thinking, so what would I put in there? There's a real chicken egg problem with a lot of the exploration thing, because it's hard to know what you do with stuff if you don't have the stuff there to play with. But if you don't know how to put it there in a manner that you can work with it, you end up with this problem, which is why, for instance, even the experiment of putting your author document map in there is interesting. Because even if all you get from it is it doesn't give me what I want, that's actually to me remarkably powerful, because that says, okay, well, we need to stop doing that particular thing, because it, in a sense, is an evolutionary dead end for what we want to do. But it is this. Again, I think the other thing I've really taken from the admittedly limited time I've put in VR is that the extra the extra is not the third dimension. It's not being able to put it on a Z order that you can actually move. It's more about having depth of field and having more plasticity of what you've got. And because that plays to our associative brain, I think we can say, oh, right, these things over there are not those things. And we're not really worried about where they are. What we're worried about is these things and those things are separate. And having enough space to do that. Because I found myself thinking when I watched it was the second of the two sort of exploration, it wasn't Fermat, the Italian guy who presented.
Jim.
And I was thinking, that's really interesting, but how did you come to put those things in those boxes there? And I'm assuming that was sort of done by a media thing. Hi, Fabian. That was done by a mediated thing that, with good intent, probably didn't necessarily need to do that. It was probably just trying to tidy up things in a way that's probably actually working against the user. And I suspect it falls out slightly from depending too much on AI guessing what it thinks we mean.
Yeah, Fabian, just to kind of fill you in a little bit, I've gone into several different things, including trying to get people to write these short articles. But specifically, there are so many areas of VR we can go into, and it can get a bit confusing. Brendel asked a little bit about what different kind of institutions might use, and we can't really answer that too deeply. But we were talking a little bit about what we don't think VR is great for. But I mean, something like writing, I think VR is fantastic for, but only because it narrows my personal view down. But in terms of using VR big, Mark was just talking about personal knowledge management. And even though it seems to be the fashion, I do actually agree with him that it seems to be the most fruitful area, because you're doing connections of large volumes of your own data, all that good stuff.
I just reposted a couple of chat things just for Fabian, because otherwise they probably won't show up in his thing.
Thanks for telling me. I thought Zoom was acting up.
Yeah, so well, to me, it's also a bit the question about when we discuss about if VR is going to win or become popular. So it's the question about this can be a use that's interesting for at least one person, or are we looking for what's going to be one of the most popular use or one of the most popular use related to text?
It had a little bit to do with Tim Cook's comments, going all crazy about AR. And then we went a little bit in and out of AR and VR. I'm just thinking about our upcoming 6 months from now demo day, which I'm hugely excited about. I'm not saying people should focus necessarily on that. That's something we can all discuss. But it would be good if we had some focus on this, because now everybody's getting into. I'm going to have to take that. It's actually my mother. I'll be right back.
Yeah, well, I'll jump. I hope everything's well. I'm gonna be thinking about what kinds of infrastructure other people would need for being able to do text in VR. What would be useful for them to be able to create spaces that make sense for them, to be able to make meaningful stuff. One of the things that being in London has made me think a lot about is literal spaces, the literal environments that that people occupy, and the necessity for them to be formed in a way that makes sense for the information and the function of those spaces, making them distinguishable and differentiable from one another. And so I've been building, I think, something for being able to automatically generate random variations of Coinbase molding, in order to be able to generate sort of moderately complicated interior spaces that can be easily built up. You know, one of the things that's really interesting about HTML and presentation on the web is the intricacy and nuance that's available in cascading style sheets. That's the thing that allows you to color and shadow and put drop shadows and borders and corner radii, double lines, dashes, and things like that around all of your text. And it's that adornment that I think is helps to make things mean things, and allows people to kind of separate entities from each other to be able to create distinct functions on the web. So I'm pretty interested in being able to do that in 3D, have things that can represent objects and spaces and allow people to separate those things from one another in ways that pass a certain threshold of visual fidelity and sort of some sense in which those are objects, they have meaning and they're related to each other. So it's textual, but it's the environment in which information and stuff sort of occurs that I think I want to be able to lend a hand for too.
Okay, I have a question to you, Brandel, and Fabian and everyone else in that cascading style sheet order. And that is, what should I tell our community to do to format their contributions to the future of text in order for me to give you something in a format that you can then do something like what you just said?
So, you know, one thing that is useful is to know who somebody is, you know, so attributes that are representative of ways in which things can be ordered and compared and structured. So things like keywords, although you know, I absolutely take Mark's point that many keywords are pretty blunt, but you know, names and locations are things that let you sort of identify and differentiate things. Some aspects of people's submissions are intrinsic. So, you know, I think Lorenzo is talking about making use of TF-IDF, the term frequency, inverse document frequency, keyword sort of assessment, so that you can identify what are likely to be salient points about this particular presenter versus that one. And so those, you know, nobody needs to supply anything beyond the actual text in a way that's moderately parsable. But yeah, like something that is interesting is anything where there's a specific identifiable intent, perhaps, of those people in terms of maybe their influences, or you know, if there's anybody they hate. Those are useful data points that sometimes you can infer. You're like, wow, this person really hates you know, Borges or something. Although everybody who spoke about Borges loved him in the conference. But yeah, like those are, I think, interesting and can be mapped and can be used to make space and sense of it.
So as a follow-up and focusing question on this is why? What do we want people to be able to get out of the work? Do we want to find out who are friends, who had shared interests, who were influenced by whom, citation trees? Do we want people to find personal perspective? What I'm saying is that at this point, I'm totally happy with being a bit more hardcore in what we expect of our contributors, but we have to say why. So what do you think, guys, that if we now produce the first PDF and VR, because that's kind of our kicker, right? Volume of work, what is the actual reader benefit that you guys want this system to have?
From my perspective, I am the first protocol for at least one of the big tech companies who is responsible for building the future of the web. And I need to know what people think about that. I need to know what they think they need. and it's useful to be able to kind of negotiate with them and understand why it is they see those things, what they see as being promising and important. Because I guarantee you, people in tech see things much more superficially, much more with sort of the immediate kind of places where markets have already been, in contrast to where markets could be. Yeah, like the reality of like Microsoft Word and Bravo before it is that nobody really thought that word processing was worth it because of the sort of the secretarial opportunities to be able to kind of pawn that kind of labor and that work off on other people, failing to realize that eventually, if you don't know how to do that yourself, you're at a disadvantage. You're like, so many people, labor through life thinking that typing was beneath them until eventually they realize that there's no amount of other people typing for you that can confer the benefits that being able to type oneself actually possesses and sort of confers on people. So yeah, like at some point, maybe kicking the can down the road, but like at some point, reality is going to be more useful than it's not for text. And the way to find it, I think, is by having people who are conscientious and aware of why and how text itself is valuable. Think about the medium too. And that's, yeah, hopefully that answers some of the question.
Well, I want to go back to a comment that you made before we changed the subject to the why question. You were talking about the Brandl, your interest in creating the frameworks, and for me, I think of them coming out of the design and linguistics fields, and and I at least try to categorize, summarize what is known in the categories of these things in part of in the second part of chapter 3 in my visual language book, but what we don't have, while we have the parts identified at this point, I think, with an occasional missing element here and there, and we'll discover it because when we stumble, when something won't work, that's how we stumble onto those things. What we don't have and this is a case of basically what I call syntax, which is composed of morphology and topology and gestalt ways of perceiving and syntactical arrangements in 2 and 3D space. We have those elements. What we don't have is then generalizations about that start with it's usually better to put this one with that one in these cases. We don't have a really, at least to my knowledge, it may exist out there. I haven't looked for it recently, but that would be what we would be looking for you to then move, into buildings, classes of spaces, which I think is what you're trying to do. I'm, if as you move along, I'm happy to work with you on that, because it is a strong interest of mine, and as I said, I think we've got, I've summarized with a lot of work what the elements are for 2D space, not for 3D space. But yeah, I think also that one of our first challenges is, can we put 2D space usefully in 3D space at all? If you can do that, well, then we can move on. we can, of course, I'm not against having lots of visioning and flowery imagination, but we first have to see if we can even get 2D space usefully into 3D. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Bob, you have seen the mural in VR, right? That's a 2D space that is incredibly clear and beautiful, I think, in VR.
Yeah, of course.
I think I think that's actually solved. Even in the basic Spoke Mozilla thing, if you have a PDF even, something as simple as that, it is really readable. So I think we got that one down. Sorry for jumping in there, guys.
Oh, that isn't what I was talking about.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about is then the ability, as I said in my talk a couple of days ago, it needs to be scalable, layerable, modifiable, and a couple of other ubbles that I can't remember right now on my list.
Well, I mean, it certainly can be a normal 2D window that can do traditional layering and all of that stuff in VR. So do you mean drawing it into the third dimension? Because I thought you specifically now meant 2D, so sorry for the misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm. And
I totally agree with you, Bob, that it's like the whole premise of interactive text has not been delivered on adequately, and that there are a number of respects in which the future of text maybe actually needs to go through 2D for us to even understand what we might be able to do with 3D. I've made a number of things with visual syntactic text formatting, talking about things like opacity sliders. I was regaling Jonathan Finn about it at Groucho. There's so many things that we can push on in really substantial ways that still can happen in 2D. One of the reasons why I like 3D is because it's no worse there, but the reality is, like just our basic understanding of what like computational text has the promise of doing is under delivered on at this point. So yeah,
yep.
I'm happy to do either and both.
Okay, good.
Fabienne?
To go to the question of what help could be provided by the community. So to me, one of the goal of being at the symposium was reached in the sense that I showed something and I got some feedback on it. It's definitely not as much or as good as I wanted it to be, but it was still a thing. Well, it's always like this. But yeah, I got some feedback. Some of it, unfortunately, and I'm not surprised, was about the difficulty of even having the experience. And that's pretty frustrating because it leads to either no feedback or feedback that is not useful. But it makes sense. So the point is, I'm happy with what went through. I have a list of issues that went from 203 to 30. So in terms of workload, I'm good to go for a while. But what I wanted to say, I wanted to share, I'll just show my screen briefly to give some body, let's say, to it. So one of the things I wanted that I showed during the presentation was the code is here, not just the demo, but how it works. But the point is, I did this for the presentation, so everything there is brand new, because I don't want to say, oh, I make an open system and then the code is going to be open in a day, a week, whatever. If I say it's open, it has to be open at the moment I say so. And why do I share this? Is because then I was able to add issues, and issue tell me this is a bug, this doesn't work, and some of those issues I can classify. And the yellow one you can see here is demo for demonstration, like things that help not the core of what the thing does, but that people can actually understand even what the thing is. And some of the comments, for example, from Bob earlier on, let's say the story part, they were there like for a week now. Some of it has been done, some of it has been fixed, but it's not closed. It's not yet let's say, ready for prime time. So my goal, I don't need, let's say, feedback or help from the community on that sense. I already received quite a lot, and I'm grateful for that from all of you. But now I want to find a way so that people can give me quality feedback even remotely, because it's one thing to put the headset onto one end in person, see how they move their hands, and be able to guide if something goes wrong, and it always does, and to be able to do so remotely. So my hope there is, let's say, that some of you will again dare to play the guinea pigs in a couple of days or weeks or whenever, when the remote demo to get your ideas through the experience itself will be there.
I'm just going to drop one thing in that is a slight tangent because I don't want to pull us off this course, but before it gets so completely forgotten, and it was just something that was occasioned by listening to somebody mention this thing of doing probably personal space work. I don't think that doing that necessarily has to be an entirely closed off wall garden, because the one thing I've taken away from some decades of doing PKM, personal knowledge management work, is that the main thing that actually people want, even if they don't know it at the outset, is the ability to share it with other people. But significantly, that isn't everyone collaborating. This is not the outcome of it is not a wiki. It's not or a Google sheet. It's the ability to be able to take something and create a meaningful use of it to share with other people in this day and age, likely remotely, i.e. via the web. They're subtly different, and I think we keep getting sucked down the everyone sinkhole for all the wrong reasons at the wrong occasions, when something we probably can do, but we don't do very well at the moment, is get the sharing part done, because you don't necessarily need lots of authors. And indeed, another thing I've noticed is that, you know, where people are doing sort of visualizations and things in real time or near real time, is often that's not being done by one person. It's probably being done by a facilitator and an operator, because there's just there's cognitive overload otherwise. And again, I think that's something we should just bear in mind. I think, I don't know why, but I think we over obsess about collaboration without really understanding what we mean by it.
I'd like to follow up on that, Mark. My experience in 3 different areas of organization, well, 4, business, government, nonprofit, and academia, is that an awful lot of the work is done in groups. Often often they are around communication groups and decision-making groups. There have been advances in the last 30 years to help groups, even groups like ours here, to pull together and record what has happened and done. This is generally done by wonderful people which I can do, but I don't do, which is to do it visually on large paper in front of the group, and now people during COVID have been doing it with various tools and drawing material. I decided I wasn't gonna go off on that track and try to learn that stuff, because it's a learning process, but I can do that kind of recording. There is and it's just not an isolated person. There is an international society, or it's called International Forum of Visual Practitioners, and they have some 500 members around, paid members around the world, and something like a couple of thousand people who are practitioners, who are doing this and are paid to do this, because people in industry realize that many of the small groups that they get together to do various tasks don't happen very well. partially because they're not facilitated very well, and partially because that they're not recorded on the fly in ways that resemble some of the structures that I use in my information murals. And by the way, there is a society, an international society of facilitators who have a bunch of skills, and there are about, as I understand, something like 15,000 members of that international society. They're helping organizations of all kinds have better meetings and get more out of their meetings, because there are 8 or 10 distinct types of meetings, and when you mix them all up, not very much happens.
I think that's all truly well and good, but I think we need to decide on how to deal with the articles as individually written pieces, how they can be submitted. We can have separate discussion on that. We can have that later, but that is a very specific use case. How people can write in a way that they actually will listen to us. So it's not like a complete template, but it is something we can then use further. But we can, of course, also look at different ways to facilitate meetings.
Well, Fred, briefly to round out that before going on to the point you've made, and is in a sense that I think I'm actually in agreement with Bob here, because the key thing I had out of that is facilitators. And the point that I was just trying to draw up is, I think the fallacy we have is we assume that more people speaking at once or more people editing at once is somehow better. The fact that we have facilitators would tend to set that as a lie, but it raises the interesting point that one group that we haven't perhaps tapped into are what facilitators think for this new medium. And on that point, I'll shut up and hand back to you.
Well, I think that's totally fine. I'm sure there will be wonderfully facilitated meetings in VR. That seems to be a very good use case. And I think that's absolutely something the group can pursue. But when it comes to this actual book that we're supposed to make, then, I have a really, really difficult time with the fact that a lot of the recordings just didn't happen because of the medium. Right, so now I have to go to the group and say, okay, you did a speaking thing, we had a community. The video recording was awful sound quality. I thought the speaker would help. It's a massive hum. Right, so if we're going to rescue that, then we might as well tell people, we're not only writing for a book, we also would like to use this as fodder for an interactive experience, and that means individually written pieces. And already it's difficult enough to tell some of these groups to write short pieces. So, but also, Bob, for what you're saying, we've already agreed as a community, at least here. I haven't seen replies to the emails, but Fabian had the suggestion that in 6 months we have another meeting face to face if we can to show stuff that is made. It can be a paper mock-up, or it can be a commercial product, or it can be a prototype, whatever. But it's not about thoughts about the world; it is about doing. And we have a very specific format for that, which includes such things as maximum. This is rough. We'll finalize it, but this is where we are roughly now. Number one, you're not allowed to spend more than a minute on who you are or why you're doing it. Nobody cares. That can go in your bio in this context. Number two, you must spend a minute saying what this thing is for. What is it actually going to help the person using it? And other than that, it's just show. So maybe, Bob, what we also should do is at some point schedule a Bob Horn style or an actual Bob Horn augmented meeting with the people in the community who want to, where it is properly facilitated. As we have discussed over the last 3 months, Bob, I think that could be very useful.
Yeah, I see the notion of facilitation as being intrinsic to what it is that any improved text really is. That facilitators are people who interpret the intent and function of a bunch of people together, and keep people on task in the same way that you say, like, no more than a minute. That's a facilitator's job. That's something that having a good one will sort of result in sort of a friction-free context in which people keep to the point. Not to undermine the utility and necessity for a human living, breathing person to do it, but one of my aims and hopes is that a space, that an environment, that a mechanism has the ability to play some part of that facilitation that allows people to direct their intent and attention at specific things and make sure that relevance is sort of central to their experience, so that what they see, how they know where to go next is clear, and that sort of relevance remains. And so, yeah, I think it's really interesting to think about what it is that visual practitioners, what facilitators do, and the ways in which they could, if not, be replaced necessarily, then the way they could be supplemented by dynamic, interactive kind of environments that allow them to orchestrate things with, hopefully, many degrees more nuance and orders of magnitude more capacity to sort of arrange and direct experiences around the intents and the intentions that a person or a group has.
One of the things that facilitators often do and is to write the question or the problem or the challenge for today, or for this segment of the meeting. I haven't seen that done in Zoom really very much at all, except for some meetings where I go that are facilitated well. Another thing that facilitators do to help people stay on topic once we have that problem or challenge or question in front of us at all times, that is somehow on a screen. So the facilitator can then say, well, thank you very much for your contribution, and I'm going to put it on this easel. And they have another easel over to one side, and that's an easel that's labeled "More Topics for Later." So they handle the interruptions and changes of topic gracefully by putting them on that, and people feel at least they've expressed them and it's there. You can see it. I would certainly hope you could have those kind of things in virtual reality meetings.
Right. So what are we actually talking about here? Are we talking about how to fill the book? Or are we talking about an aspect of virtual reality? Or are we talking about a different kind of meeting? I just want to make sure we're on the same page. It's just a question, because the original part of this was simply, I completely fucked up with the recordings, and I feel really, really bad with that. And I'm just trying to find out how to get written pieces out of people in general. And now it seems the discussion has become, we need to have another forum where someone asks them what to do and we transcribe that. I think that's absolutely legitimate, just like Fabienne's 6 months from now demo day. But is that a separate thing we're thinking about, or are we talking about the content of the book, or what is this part of the discussion, so that I'm zoned in?
Right. So I guess I hadn't connected that your concerns were so concrete and pragmatic. So not being one of the people who actually went to the bother of presenting, I don't know how much I can speak for others, but my guess is that most people, if their recording was a total wash, probably wouldn't resent a do-over. Maybe not. But that represents an opportunity to think about what it is you want to do with that media, that video, and if they have slides, the way that you kind of integrate those. Because we have some camera roll for just about everybody of those things, and a number of people have presumably done some variation of what they presented in the past. So it's not like it's completely foreign and they won't remember what it is that they were sort of going through. So in that sense, I don't know. I mean, you could check with folks whether they would be willing to or not do a re-record. I'd be happy to be an audience for any and all subsequent re-recordings if that's helpful or appropriate as well. If it helps for them to be aware that it's actually going to an audience. Yeah, like I'm just not that concerned with the specific, and this is, you know, not being adequately maybe enmeshed in the academy, but just not that concerned with the specific tangible record, as long as what we've succeeded in doing is sort of cement some questions in people's minds, and that there's an urgency for them to be considering what those opportunities are as various shoes drop, as various hints become broader about what different companies have and expect to be able to do with things, and so that they are able to get ahead of, you know, what the future of computing is going to be like, and so that they can kind of push in that direction. And if we need a marker for this is the thoughts that we had right now, then we have some, and, you know, worst comes to worst, a simple re-record of exactly what actually happened in terms of the presentations will be a useful sort of a buttress to that as well.
Thank you. Mark, I see your hand.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I feel pain. I know the effort you put into this, and I know it's absolutely gutting when it turns out that, you know, that the envisaged sort of total recording hasn't come about. But I mean, that's just, you know, where things are. And I think when this has to move forward, I mean, perhaps a useful thing though is to put some sort of scale to this. I don't know how much or what isn't missing, because to a certain extent, so there will be parts of this overall presentation that are totally missing, in that people have sent you nothing and there's no record of what they said, to people who sent you everything and have a recording as well, which might make more sense of, well, how much do you want to do about it? Because it's perfectly possible through good intent to just do an awful lot of backfill for stuff that we probably don't need to hear again. And that's not, and I hasten to add, that's not in any way, shape or form meaning to sort of trivialize the bits that might be lost, because I think it's already been said, you know, the words have been said and we move forward. And I'm conscious that anyway, a number of the pieces probably on the second day where, especially from a sort of humanities perspective, they're opinion pieces and they could be said over, that you get the gist of it. You probably don't need necessarily.
No, I understand that, and I thank you guys about, you know, maybe doing re-recording, but you know, the question is, we need to fill a book. At least I need to fill a book, and in order to do that, it has to be written. You know, you can't put video in a book. I mean, you can in the loosest sense, and it becomes kind of amusing, but that's not what we're talking about.
Well, perhaps something useful to know would be how much is missing.
No,
in a sense.
No, it's not, because one of the things we've learned by doing the journal is that transcripts are really quite shit, because speaking and writing are such different mediums, right? And even Barbara Tversky, when she saw that she was going to be included in the book, said, shit, she didn't say that. She said, I need to go through the transcript. There's a lot of errors in there, and it doesn't present it well, right? So that's why the good side of this is it's really a strong focus on there needs something to be something written by people. Right, and I'm wondering now to try to turn this unpleasant situation into positive, without being flippant about it and saying, okay, guys, if you haven't written something, and as you've seen in the rough draft, most people haven't, you know, what do you prefer? Do you want to just do it again and do a transcript? Or if you want to write, what guidelines should we give them? This is something I think everybody today has said in a different way, that it's better with guidelines, it's better with a bit of structure. And then we can do something more useful with that later. Mark, and then Fabian.
Well, to take Fabian first, I've just spoken.
Well, he'll regret it, but I think at some point, the meta aspect and the cat herding. So I was grateful for you to both organize it and herd us in terms of the timing, publishing, but at some point also, some people just don't want to do it or don't find that they have the time, they don't want to invest it. And if you spend too much time with everybody who still care, complaining or pushing and whatnot, then it's counterproductive. If at some point you try to get everybody to publish until everybody does and one person doesn't, then everybody else is wasting time. So I think, yeah, we try and we record as much as we can, but at some point we also need the content, need the quality discussions, whatever format they can be. So at some point, yeah, we try our best, but we need to give up if either the format is not the right, or we lost records, or people just don't like that kind of format. That's okay. We lose some people or some content by the way, but at some point we need to do.
Yeah, I very much thank you for that. If I understood you correctly, we push the people who are pushable, and the ones who aren't, we just deal with whatever they have. Yeah, I agree. But then there is a really important aspect, and then there's Jaron Lanier's presentation, because that isn't really a summary for a page or two easily. I mean, he's not going to write it, but it is an example for us, because it was very long with a lot of dialogue going into it. How can we possibly make that more readable? You know, what can we do as a group? Of course, I'll get it transcribed and all of that, but how can we, first of all, do a bit of markup, a bit of bolding and stuff? What would be actually good to make that readable in and of itself, and see how it's connected to other things? Would that be a good case study, maybe?
Well, with the pushable people, you can have them reflect on it and react to it. Like we're not linear, but we're not nobody. Our opinions aren't completely irrelevant, and so some capacities to kind of comment on. And you know, one of the things that was really amazing about the was it the Chomsky Foucault debate? I only watched a bit of it recently. So Noam Chomsky and Michel Foucault had a debate in somewhere, and about 2/3 of the recording is actually a couple other philosophers watching it and responding to it, and it's very surreal, but it turns it into a different and manifestly more actionable artifact. I would argue in terms of what it forces actual an ultimate audience to kind of think and conclude.
I think that's really important. One of the things we've talked about with normal PDF documents before is the notion of binding. Just to remind you what I mean by that. Imagine you can have a binding of all 3 volumes of future text as one thing, or you can choose to only have the bits marked for whatever it might be. So that's a binding, right? So to be able to, if we have that, then we also get into the question of how do you quote within the same document? How do you cite within the same document? So I think that would be, Brenda, I think what you're talking about there is really, really key. We need to push. So we have 2-week deadline for people to write the original stuff. That includes us getting Jaren's in there. And we give them that draft and we say, here it is. Now we would really appreciate if you write something about things that are in here. You know, let's even tell them specifically the 2 keynotes. What do you have to say about it? And we make it citable within the same volume to the sections they're talking about. That should give us some more fodder for VR explorations and to make it easier to read as well, right?
I'm a little unclear now about well, how did these deadlines for the book come about? You know, why do we have something by the end of the year?
The reason
and what the form of the, you know, and why this group is now sort of trying to be, or being asked to be co-editors or conceivers of the book.
The reason for the deadline at the end of the year is because this is the 3rd year we have a book. So it's just 1 book a year, makes sense. So that's the arbitrary deadline. Also, I think it's really, really important, as I went on and on about, that we need to write down our dreams of VR so that people in the future can be inspired by us. And considering that Apple's headset is coming out next year, I want the date of publication of the book to be before that. So let's say you're a student and you want to cite thoughts before the headset comes out. It's really easy to see the year. You don't have to look at the month to know that this is what people thought about before. Let's be arbitrary. I'm not saying that you guys here have to be co-editors or anything of the book at all, but I do think we've had ongoing discussions about how our own knowledge product, our own dialogue, whether it's presentations, the dialogues we have here, or the written, can be the content for VR explorations of our knowledge. So having just sent an email out to everybody yesterday, I'm just wondering for feedback here, what would actually benefit specifically Fabian and Brandon who are building stuff? What kind of, in what shape the article should be? And I'm asking very much everyone else, as in, if we are going to build not just a PDF, but if we're also going to let this data be really richly interactive, what's the point? What's the kind of reading experience we want? If it's a leisurely read through the whole thing, we need to do nothing. But if it is to be able to do specific kinds of connections or something like that, we most definitely can benefit the reader by helping give some means for which they can navigate and view the resulting there. Yep. And to be really clear, Bob, I would ideally like at before publication, but after all the stuff is in, to go through with you, and if it's possible, make some sort of a mural. I don't know which style of mural you think would make sense, because it's not just answering one question, there are many things. If you think that's appropriate, that would be insanely wonderful. If you don't think it fits, that would be okay. We can do something later. But to me, it seems obvious that taking a document in VR and opening up massive, it's not just going to be tons of rectangles. It has to have a useful shape.
Yeah. Not, I would say not possible by the end of the year. And by the way, I have to leave very soon. So just wanted to say thanks for the conversation today. Since I wasn't at the meeting, this has been very valuable to hear what people were saying about it. Thank you all.
Bob, thanks for being here today. And also the two keynotes are up. If you go to the Future of Text Symposium website, and they are linked to from there, whenever you have a chance to look for it, if you want.
Okay, bye.
I have a thought, Fred. I find myself sitting here thinking that I'm trying to get my head around the fact that part of the problem is we've got an incomplete data set. So what, at the far end of which is a book, and at the moment, where we are here is an aspiration for a book, and a statement that we're missing lots of stuff, but I don't know how much we're missing of which thing, because to a certain extent that dictates what we can do. Because going back to the point somebody's made about, those who we can push on to get something may do it, but those we can't. So what we have slightly means that is the cloth from which we must cut our next step. And I'm just unsighted on that, and I don't say that as an accusation, and since I ought to know. But what I mean is I can't know until I have access to that information, because I thoroughly accord with the idea that above and beyond the notion of something akin to a journal, that really what we want to be able to do is the enhanced part. So I think that's where it's worth making the effort. I mean, in a sense, I'm sure we can rack up enough content to put in there, but really much more interesting is to be able to demonstrate that whatever the content that there is in there, that we can make something more than that by use of the VR environment. And so maybe that's our way in to unpick the puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing that everybody has to have is a written piece for this. But somebody like Fabian, I can't see him wanting to. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Just writing a big chunk of paragraphs of text. There would have to be a ton of screenshots.
I was going to, but okay.
No, but there would have to be a ton of screenshots, right? That's what I'm saying. You'll still do the right thing. I don't think you wouldn't do that, but it can't just be text. Am I right?
No, of course not.
Right. Yeah, so it would be, there are different ways to get this expression across. And I just think that we have an opportunity here to really try to build for reading in VR, but whatever we do there will probably benefit the printed version as well, right? And one thing we can do, Mark and me being, the editor people, you don't have to do it, is the people who don't give us good bios, we'll just have to make them up. We've already been doing that for some people. And then all of us go through and say, is this useful data? Because knowing where people are born is cute. But in and of itself, it is not something you really need, right? So then together we look at what we have and we say, like maybe Fabian thinks of a timeline and Brandel thinks about something. It doesn't matter. Your interests come in and you say, I wish I could represent such a thing. Then it's up to Mark and me to push people to give you such a thing.
Yeah, and influence links for people who care to sort of cite those. I mean, it's something I'm very conscious of. If Brandon quite eloquently speaks of, and Fabian too, of sort of things they've seen, where the ideas came from, and that's actually really interesting too to capture in a way that isn't sort of just set in concrete, some boring thing, but an ability to get to see where some extra connections may occur, because it's often being able to go back over these. I don't want to call them graphs; that's way too techy for me. But these interrelations, these skeins of observation and learning, I think are tremendously interesting. And I see Jim has his hand up.
I want to reinforce what both of you are saying. When I did my summary a week or two ago of what I thought about writing and conciseness and formatting, I used an example of tiny text and listed my interests. As I was doing that, the beginning parts of that list were elements of my bio. But I realized as I produced it that what was probably more important were my interests. That the bio is looking backwards in a rear view mirror. The interests are looking forward to the future. And if the purpose of these interactions and the interactions at the symposium is primarily looking forward, then even calling that summary a bio is probably a mistake, because it's the interests that are more forward-looking. I mean, I love the stuff that I've seen Brandel and Fabian doing, the most technological of many of us. I don't have the skills, but I have the interest to kind of key into what they're doing, because I've, for the last 10 or 15 or 20 years, have had this dream in my head of three-dimensional information spaces, which I've always sketched in 2 dimensions. But I also know that they're a variation on, probably a variation on what Doug Engelbart was thinking when he talked about dynamic knowledge repositories. I think I've expanded in my dream what those are, but it gets back to what Fabian called, or maybe it was Froda, interests, and then Mark said influence links. All of those to me are tremendously important and interesting.
I just had another quick thought. Something that sort of comes out. Sorry, and I seem to be talking rather a lot, but something that comes out to me from this is that maybe, I mean, one of the things is sometimes people want an example of what to write. Not everyone is great at just going down, and a sort of dog feeding exercise for us is we can strip the names off to say embarrassment, but basically take a few bios and say, right, which ones of these are tractable to us for doing stuff in VR and which aren't? And they may all, at the start, you'll have several bios that are all written, they make sense, they're coherent English. But in fact, when you look at them, you find that, this one can't be enhanced at all, and that one can be. And to actually extract that, and because what that says is, what are we actually expecting that people may not normally write? I mean, we all write, in a sense, from our own perspective, we think we're writing the right thing, we hand it in, we think we've covered the thing. We cover the topic adequately. But I sense that where we're drifting towards is that even if we don't know quite yet how to articulate it back out to people, that we're looking for them to write in a more precise and structured. I hate to use the word structured, but you know, in essence, we want more hooks that we can hang stuff on in there, and that might not be their natural way of doing stuff, and therefore we need to be able to give them example as to why this works and that one doesn't. Just a thought. But I mean, you know, we could take some bios that we have and just look over them and say, well, you know, does this have more structure than that? Just a thought.
Bios are one thing, absolutely, you know, connecting people, but connecting the articles is, of course, slightly different. But it seems to me that something we have to do, which we haven't done, is categorize. Let's not even use the word keyword. So that, for instance, Jaren's piece was about humanity's relationship with technology type of thing. That's one layer, you know, and Fabian was how to make an amazingly powerful VR room. All related, but, you know, very different types of things. We probably need to find a way to make that really clear to the reader. And, you know, there were a lot of artistic, as someone mentioned, pieces there, you know, the history of my artwork. You know, we may have to start assigning that kind of stuff to it. You know, what do you want to dive into actually read? You know, as editors, Mark, we're just going to have to take responsibility for saying that. And if people don't want to say it themselves, it's fine. We do it for them. And if they disagree, great, we change it.
Well, exactly. This is, sorry, I think I almost stepped on Randall there. But just quickly to say that certainly as an editor, I mean, my view of this is in the digital age, we're not trying to make, this is not basically hanging off, you know, the need for a dead tree sort of version, in the sense that if it's wrong, it can be fixed, or it can be annotated, you know, in a way that our future digital selves can go and see, okay, this is what they originally said, and they changed something later, and that's fine.
So the thing then, in terms of what we want to enable for the reader, is several things. One is find the author they're interested in, read it. That's easy. It's called the table of contents. Second one is find an aspect of it. You know, how do I build AI stuff, and read that. But then we also have, you know, finding something you're not looking for, which is why it's in a document rather than spread out, like Jaron Lanier's mystical person thing. You know, how do you feed people into that? How do you give them an entry to that? That's difficult and more interesting because it's completely non-obvious. So it can be very, very, I mean, imagine if we did manage to do what Randall said about, you know, we get people to write their pieces now, and we take what we can, see how it goes, give them a new version of it, and then give a mechanism they can cite the earlier stuff. How amazing would it be to start making shapes of that, of those text snippets in space? And, you know, maybe we even privilege the two keynotes. You know, you go into a room just for the sake of it. You walk in, you have two long columns of text, one keynote per day. That may be your starting point for one view. And then you can see that Bob Stein disagrees with Jaron Lanier at almost every single point, which is funny because he's the reason Jaron Lanier is there. It's because of Bob Stein, right? But it's like, so you can instantly read red, strong lines, Ted Nelson style, saying, this is nonsense, this is bullshit, with or without assertion, so we can choose what it is. But because the thing I do not want to do is build static CD-ROM information silos. I don't think anybody wants to do that. We want to experiment to the point that if we get successful with this type of publishing book, anybody can make a book like this, right? It should be generalizable to an extent, right? Not just a one-off. And if we manage to do that, if we manage to make what is essentially a conference proceeding, but only blue sky tracks, none of these were very formal, so just checking. Imagine if we do it so well that Jaron Lanier said, I have never been represented so well in my life. You know, that's the kind of thing that could get traction more and more. And then Tim Cook says, oh, actually, Randall, you need to change the direction of our VR system. It needs to be knowledge built. It has to be open. It has to be these things. This could be a tremendous PR exercise. And just having bearded old Vint Cerf sitting there with all these bearded old paintings in a room is kind of the cover of it, so to speak, right? It's cute. You know, there are many ways we can do it, but
Yeah.
above,
There was sorry, go ahead.
You go. I was
All
done.
right.
I was rambling.
All right. There was a 2016 era VR documentary, and I need to dig it up again. It was really interesting in terms of the form. I don't recall much about the content. I think it was because it was about music video people, but it was really interesting in terms of having 3D point clouds of interview participants and things like that, as well as being able to kind of create interstitial spaces that sort of were indicative of the different thematic sort of points and turning points that they created for them. And it was pretty cool. It was on technology that was then pretty limited because it was an Oculus Rift or DK2 sort of thing. So it was primarily 3-degree of freedom tracking, where I really do think that 6-degree is something very, really special. So I might dig it up, but another thing that I'm going to do at least is take a look at whatever the most recent sort of draft of is that we have of volume 3 in terms of, if not like the content, then the sort of the bins and the nature of the content, and kind of dream with that a little bit. And one of the things that I'm gonna have to do in order to build that is to construct something to be able to take that data and then turn it into sort of high level objects that are then become ready to hand to be able to kind of arrange and organize into a space. So that's going to be an interesting thing. I'm going to have to do that when I get home. I don't have the wherewithal to be able to do that kind of stuff here.
I'll send you the author doc because
you.
then the JSON stuff is kind of neat. Right?
Yes, yeah, no, that'll be awesome. Thank you very much. And yeah, I'll screenshot some of that process, see if it comes to anything, or if it I'm fairly unlikely. It comes to absolutely nothing, and I just feel sad about myself.
But it's you interesting point to the chicken egg problem here. It's a sense of are we trying to fill out do we start with the design and work backwards, i.e. what we want to do in VR, or do we say, well, here's what we've got, what can we make from it? And the answer is we probably want a bit of both, which makes it even more difficult. I suspect the tractable one is to sort of, in a sense, tip the bucket out on the table. So, well, what have we got to work with? Because if nothing else, right. I think a really useful thing that can be done is said, well, what we would have liked to have done had been something like this. But the reality is,
exactly
what we were able to get, we were able to build this, and that's tremendously valuable, because that allows you to go to the wider sort of populace who are saying, well, isn't it just an implementation problem? You say, well, actually, no, it isn't. And because I'm sure that where we would end up from that process would show up all sorts of problems that we didn't really think were problems, and that's why I think it's tremendously valuable.
Right. So the reality of it is that, let's say I'm missing roughly half. Okay, but I don't. Now that I've kind of accepted that, we have the 2 keynotes. I think that it would be bad of me to take some of the video off and some of it not, and some of it really crappy. It just wouldn't be a good show, right? So
I don't know. I was just at the British Museum, and they put up on plinths and pedestals things that are in incredibly terrible condition. It's more about being able to preserve what you can about the context, to be able to kind of say, these are the things that we know. This is the sort of supposition that surrounds it. But I'm okay with it personally.
I don't mind doing that.
It's not my stuff that's garbled, but yeah.
I don't know. I don't mind doing that later, but I really don't have a problem as long as we agree a little bit on the format, as I think we do. To email, like Caleb, he was really annoyed at me. You may remember. He said, "Oh, I can't believe you're interrupting," all that stuff. He talked at 200 miles an hour. It was completely unintelligible. All he needed to tell us is, I take the world's data and I make it visible. And there are APIs, right? He has a beautifully simple story. So I wouldn't mind chasing him with a couple of emails, because he never replied before. It was basically nothing, and then 200 million, right? To go to every single person and say, what you presented was brilliant. Their name, not a group email. And then we'll see, give it a bit of time. Because reading a transcript is just heavy. But also, I'm glad right now for the second Bob is not here, because when I talk about mural, I mean 2 very different things. I mean a properly done Bob Horn mural that has the process and thought behind it. I also mean just a hugely graphical way of showing whatever stuff we have. Right? And the second one we should at least be able to do. If Bob wants to do the first one, we will give him the time and space, right? It will be amazing. We just have to find out what he actually wants for that. It just simply, we put these things together and we have, not visible connections, because that turns out they're really, really annoying if they're in your face. But really amazing ways we can make these connections apparent without that. Yeah, I think we can do something beautiful.
I'm confident, again, without promising anything formally, that as a more like an art piece display that will work in VR, that will have the entirety of all the video we have related to the symposium, the text and metadata attached to it. And if some of that metadata are links from one presentation to another, to display that as an experience. Like when I say art piece, what I imply is a messy, ugly mess that hopefully could be improved and people could give feedback on. But this time, in terms of having one space, we're assuming we have, let's say, one online directory with all that content, including the metadata, that of course should definitely not be called a mural, because there would be no process on how to organize it in a way that, let's say, Bob appropriated the term because he wrote about it. But let's say such an experimental display in VR with all this data and metadata, including the connection, thrown together, definitely can be. I can promise to try to do that for sure.
Oh yeah.
Are you talking about a jazz-like mural, Fabian?
I'm talking like a bit of a mess with video and screenshot of the different random moment of all the video. A bit actually that was shown for the tapestry example, where you can process either random moment of the video, extract a frame, or the actual video itself. But like I say, it would be more artistic in the sense of having an experience of the noise of the symposium, not like a quality experience that one would replace a trace of it, let's say, a trace of traces of it.
Okay, Fabian, I actually have the education of an artist. So when you say, art is rough and messy and all of that, I know where you're coming from, but I actually want to support you and not chide you. God, I've used that word 3 times this week. Never used it in my life before that. Anyway, let me tell you what I think being an artist is, because it's actually important to this. You may or may not agree, but to me, being an artist is an exploration. It's about seeing the world kind of as it is, kind of as it might be, having acknowledging your own subjectivity. But it's above all, it's an exploration, probably no different from that of a scientist or an engineer in that sense. So to me, what is really important, and this is why I stopped being an artist, even though I went to Chelsea School of Art and all of that, is quite simply this. The stuff that you see framed in a gallery, I call that souvenirs of the artist's journey. That's all it is, okay? Because in a sense, the art is not there. The art is in the artist. And the problem is, if you're a real artist pushing in whatever direction it might be, you're going to push too far and you're going to break what you're making. The broken thing is probably the art. The thing you frame isn't, because you did it on purpose. It's by design. It's taking a step back. So for you and the rest of the community to take the artistic perspective of, I'm going to see how this goes. It'll probably look like shit, because aesthetics and art are, of course, a very different thing. That is absolutely important, beautiful, and wonderful. So if you can do that, and also document it with screenshots as well as code of saying, I built this is absolute rubbish, and here's why. That is so important. That would absolutely, look, for me to add images to the book makes the book bigger, and that's a deficit in many ways, because it needs to be transportable. But these kinds of screenshots are absolutely priceless. So thank you.
So to argue or clarify, or hopefully both, what I meant is that or let's say the scientific process has a methodology that you must justify. So in that sense, and it would it is for a good reason, but that's taking too long. That's not something I can commit to. Throwing it literally on a virtual space on a wall, because I see, maybe naively, but a pretty direct path to that, and then delegate, let's say, the methodological process to participants, that works for me. And yeah.
It's just another layer of agreement with you, and also to say how important I think what you're saying is. Even an architect who has to make something so physical it physically doesn't fall down, very often starts with a pencil sketch. And you don't have someone from health and safety looking at the safety. It's going to be a complete
On a
mess,
napkin.
because it has to be. Yeah, back of a napkin, whatever it might be. So, when you're talking about these things, don't undervalue them. There's nothing less valuable than it is something that goes out of any of these other very explicit approaches. And in some ways, I'd say, Fabian, what you're doing is much, much harder, because you literally have a blank page, or in your case, a 4-dimensional space, right? You don't have any constraints. It's much harder. So thank you for allowing your brain to go there. And I have 17% laptop battery left. I'm on my older pre-M1 16-inch today to see what it's like lugging around a big screen. And actually, super nice. Should last out the session.
If there is a little lull in the conversation, I'll hijack Brendel to say, if you go to see Bob's to help him with the headset, please let me know a little bit in advance, because then I would push extra hard to make the remote demonstration capabilities and maybe the bugs related to it, to try to tackle that as much as possible.
Cool. I would like to head over, and I'd love to catch up with you at some point, Jim, as well. I haven't put any concrete plans on for when to do that, but realizing the value of being able to have face-to-face conversations as we've had this week has really cemented my need to try to get together with folks where I can, and actually show and help. That Vint was so unconvinced, and remains not perfectly convinced, but much more amenable to it through very basic demonstrations. Means
flexible, and that would be wonderful, Brandel. I'd love to be a fly on the wall as you presented or helped Bob.
Yes, absolutely. I'm only back on a Wednesday, and I also have a day job that I will probably have to kind of dip back into in order to be able to sing for earn my keep. But I'll definitely look at what time I can spare and when in order to be able to get to you both, and ideally both together.
We're both retirees, so our schedules are very flexible. Yours is not.
If or rather when you will meet Jim, then also warn me a bit in advance, Brendel, because I had some discussion with Andrea during the symposium, and some of the things that are more related to the organization of space from an architecture point of view. I had a discussion yesterday morning on a friend of mine who made the design of 3D printers, and he made it parametrically using SCAD, so software-assisted parametric development. He did the entire printing like this. And it's something we already discussed, like I want to include text to 3D object design, not from an AI perspective, just like you type text, you get a shape, a 3D shape in it, And that's something I would specifically like you, GM, to actually experience. I'm not ready for this yet, but if there is a date where you'll meet, then same, I would do my best to try to push specifically for it. Simple things where you draw something, let's say, around you in front of you, and then you extrude it. But then if you can bind or snap the text to it, I think it could make something quite interesting. But yeah.
Is one thought that occurs. I'm afraid I'm recording. There's a brief period after you dropped off, but I picked up a recording, so I'll obviously deal with that. Is in terms of this sort of starting thing is almost the sort of the ability to have a sort of ride along facility. You want someone who's almost in lockstep, moving in and out of the process with you via whatever technical means, because when I think back, the things that were most informative to my understanding were leaving aside any sort of hassles about typing keywords and things, but sort of passwords, but was that just initial stage of transitioning. And once I got into, oh, right, so this is the virtual reality I've been told about. But there are all sorts of sort of confusions based on, well, preconceptions in a way. And so it's almost, I don't know quite how one can do this, but it's like having a sort of someone alongside you, seeing what you are seeing. So it's almost like having a slaved system, if we're allowed to use that word now. So except no. Okay, you don't want to be doing that. You want to be doing this, and understanding what they are or aren't seeing against your expectation of what you thought they would see based on what they were told to do. I mean, I just don't know how feasible that is, but it seems it appears to me that's an emergent problem.
2 eyes rather than one.
I have a very, very specific, very prosaic request here, and that is all of this is going to come down to, can people write more succinctly? Jim has been on this for so long and can bold the right thing, so to speak. So here the question becomes, when I read news articles online or wherever, the first thing I do is skip the first couple of paragraphs because it's going to be absolute rubbish. So it's going to be, like today, Putin took over a part of Ukraine. So what do we have in the beginning of the articles? Russia invaded Ukraine, this and that is up. Yeah, I effing know that, right? If I need filling stuff, fine, I'll go back for it. But is there, to the knowledge of you guys, some sort of machine learning, AI, whatever you want to call it, that can deal with that kind of problems? Because we've looked at some summaries for the articles in the books, but if we could just find something that we think summarizes within specific criteria that we think is right, stick it at the beginning of the articles, let the authors read it. If they violently disagree, fine, edit it. But these summaries are so insanely crucial because, for instance, that Jaron Lanier presentation, to get it, you really have to do the whole thing. But to do the whole thing, you really need to know that it's worth doing, and you need to know what's kind of in it, right? Do you guys know if there's some code we can access somewhere for this?
In terms of natural language processing for being able to extract what the point of stories and things like that is, there are things that exist. Indexing systems need to be able to understand what the purpose and function of things are. What I'm less certain of is whether there's a sort of within document saliency map of identifying what are the sort of the actual critical nuggets of information that would be, say, surfaced as part of a search result. But that's one place where there's a reasonable corpus of information about it. It's the information retrieval as a subfield of search.
I just thought of something. I'm really, really stupid. Magazines usually have a pull-out quote. We should probably do that manually.
Yes.
Yeah, go inside, find the thing, stick it in the front, make it a pull-out quote, make it look differently, and have that marked up in such a way that we're in a rich environment, it can be shown independently of the rest of the stuff.
I have to jump off now to catch the last lecture in the architecture series.
You do that, and I'm going to have to, my laptop is dictating. We got somewhere today, didn't we, guys?
Yeah, I'm really pleased with it.
Have a good weekend.
See you later, Peter.
Very quickly for the end of the recon, pick up this one thing I sort of hear in you describing this thing of things being sort of too loosely summarized is something that it sounds to me, if you were to take all those little snippets and put them into effectively a hypertext, and they're all joined together, then you don't need the scaffolding at 4.5 ends, because you arrive there knowing why you were arriving. So what you see as the unnecessary part in the news article is the fact that if somebody else is reading it with no knowledge of the subject 4 years later, without that, it wouldn't make much sense. So there's a layering effect so what we perhaps aren't saying expressly enough to people is you don't need the outer scaffolding, and we probably need to give people some examples, because for most people, I suspect that won't make sense, especially if they're not used to doing that, and I don't think I am. I mean, I too would find it much easier to do that with an example. So I think what you're saying, it makes eminent sense. I think we're just asking people to write in a different way, and finding that that's actually perhaps more unusual than we thought it was.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, I think absolutely a big point. And same as what Fabian is saying, what is news to you? There needs to be ways. I mean, now that we have all these things that Fermat and these people are using to analyze text in a new way, to just extrapolate from, let's say, Ukraine, this horrible situation, from the corpus of all the news, here is the actual new bit, right? And if you don't know what that means, you should be able to somehow go back to see more, right? Same with lots of other things, in science and technology. This was Doug Engelbart's biggest problem, he said to me. He didn't know how much other people knew. So he didn't know how to present, and he felt kind of lost. Anyway, I'll get to Norway and check on my mom. It's just the most bizarre situation. And then I think next week I'll start chasing people individually, and I say, so sorry, if you want to write bio, look at what we already have here. We'd like a small article. If you can give us a sentence of what you're actually trying to say, and we'll see what we get, if anything.
And by all means, if you think there are a sample of sort of good and bad, or let's say a range of them that you might like a number of us to give you a ranging feedback on, perhaps that might be useful as well. This isn't about saying X is very good and Y is bad, but simply that trying to drag out some good exemplars of what we want might perhaps help us move forward a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, very practically, Brandel, are you guys staying out, or are you coming into the rain for a drink?
I'll talk to Heather about it. I haven't brought up the possibility that we might go anywhere. Would you mean going to Wimbledon?
Yes. If you do decide to come,
okay.
If you want to be teenagers and be crazy, I'll pick you up at the station, obviously, and drive you back. But anyway, it's not important. It would be fun. It's just really awful that I have to leave tomorrow morning. So here we go.
Yes, no, I totally understand. We did a bit of walking today, but I'll check in with her what she thinks she's up to.
Okay, just text me or call either way. All right, guys.
Yeah,
I'll see you on Monday.
You.
And I appreciate your community indescribably much. Have a good weekend.
Thank you again for this and for the symposium, Fred. It was really a wonderful experience.
Thank you for being there. Bye.
Bye. Take care.
The four of us were there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.